See? Okay, so welcome back. We're here in Espacio Fundación Telefónica in Madrid, sharing with everyone present and also on the streaming this sessions of Mad Thoughts, the thought program of Mad Festival, which is happening for the whole month of May here in the city. And we've already finished our first roundtable in where we try to start to analyze and understand a little bit more what digital arts means. And for this second roundtable, we wanted to continue a line of thought that we started last year, actually here in the same space, to somehow start reaching or thinking or discussing about what are the spaces for digital art. Digital art is something that's quite new and that's quite emerging, and with this art there are also emerging these new places for it to share it and to enjoy it and to exhibit it. So for this reason we invited an amazing panel of 3 guests, all of them international, that we were able to bring them here thanks to Acción Cultural Española, and yeah, we wanted to invite these 3 very different profiles to have these 3 different approaches on what these spaces mean. On one side we have Ana Drucker, who's the curator of Mira Festival in Barcelona, a festival that we've always admired, and I think that a festival that's somehow always been very cutting edge in the same format of the festival, and we've had the enormous pleasure of collaborating last year, and hopefully we'll continue collaborating for a very, very long time. We also have Yannick Antoine, project coordinator and curator of projects in IMAL, at the Digital Arts Center of Brussels, an institution that it's maybe not that known internationally, or at least not here in Spain, but for us it's like a absolute reference in the way you're understanding digital art and exhibiting and connecting it with the city. And we had a last minute change. Zaiba Jabbar was supposed to be here today, but she had a personal problem, so she couldn't make it. But instead we have the enormous pleasure of presenting today Chris Arguelles, who's an architect and researcher and a very good friend for a very, very long time, and she just arrived here from Vienna this morning, so it was very perfect in timing. So she's going to share her perspective from the academia point of view, from how academia and thought and philosophy is also helping to shape these new spaces, not only physical spaces but also mental spaces for digital arts. So I'm going to give the word to Ana, and thank you very much for being here today. Thank you very much Espacio Fundación Telefónica for hosting us, and let's start.
Hello, I'm Ana, and I work in Mira, which is a festival based in Barcelona. We did also 2 editions in Berlin, and I'm gonna super briefly explain the structure, and then we can talk about how you curate each part. So as you said, our festival is mainly based in exhibition, but mostly music. We can talk about that after. So yeah, our main thing is audiovisual shows. We mix art musicians with digital artists, and every time we try to commission projects that are specially done for the edition or for the festival, or bringing what we think is cutting edge in performance or musical value. For example, this show Azutiwalin, which is a DJ that it's starting, collaborated this year with The Fasten, which is a well-known VJ. So we try to make these synergies. This is something very important for us, and I think that's why Mira became sort of known around. And then also projects that mix, or musicians that are usually known for I don't know, a DJ set like Nicolas Jarre, but we invite them to do other stuff, no? This type of show that he collaborated with this dancer, and they presented this sort of set that it was more more performative and more near the public. So this is the way we try to inside in music, no? Then another big thing of the festival is installations, and we try to make recorrido.
Like a
path. Yeah. always trying to take people out of like the music sort of focus that it's like really important in festivals, and like try to push them into spaces that are probably not like the main focus of what you're used to see, but we believe like that's the way of like making the public experience something else, that it's more mixed sort of. And we also curate every time site-specific installations. One of the good things is that probably that's the only time you're gonna see that sort of installations. They never move around, which is a bad thing in some ways, but it also makes it sort of special, no? We curated, for example, this installation with Carlos Saez, and then the piece started like transforming, and it has moved like to galleries, but it has never been presented as it was like in the space, no? And again, this was like a small format installation piece, and we made it like really, really big in like 1,000 square meter room. Then we have the Dome. Mira was, I think, one of the first festivals that brought this type of projections. And we try to also include pieces that are not only based on like the technique or like the digital tool itself, but try to push projects that are also narrative and that are also like, trying to have another type of view in like digital technology, no? This was a project from Conan Pax, which is actually a VJ and a musician. He's also a graphic designer, and he did this project for Mira. And then Adult Swim, which is like a sort of part of Cartoon Network, and they presented this like trip that I think has only been exposed in USA once, and then it came to Mira. And we have also a digital art gallery. This varies depending on the edition, but we want to take the public to spaces that are not usual in music festivals and try to like take them away from like the festive sort of thing, and pushing the public to be able to have more patience in seeing or like taking the time to actually do like a path around the spaces. The space is very important for us, and we try to like activate different parts so that people are not only focused and they have to move around, and they have to like participate with what's happening, no? Well, these are examples of the exhibition we did in 2018. Then we have a lot of parallel events where we include like workshops and conferences and like sort of installations in galleries. And this is also part of like the week of the festival. But it's also very important for us to take the festival outside the 3 days, because if not, it's like really short. So we try to collaborate with spaces around the city to be able to like program stuff that they usually don't have. Like for example, in the auditorium that they usually play like classic music, or that sort of like more academic type of music. And we try to like present projects that are usually not seen in an auditorium or not seen in a gallery that they represent like all artists or whatever, no? We also have like residencies. It's very important for us to have this type of like thought inside the festival, because music festivals are not known for that, and especially music festivals, no? It's usually just the festive part, and we try to like work with artists in like long-term relationships that maybe they start like in a residency, and then after 2 years they develop a project that can be presented at the festival. So like we try to build up relationships that can last a bit longer. And then this is our last project that started in the pandemic, because we didn't want to go online. We thought that it was too much. So we had the opportunity to work with this space in Barcelona that is called Ideal, and it's like an immersive room. And the project is based on narrative immersive films. Like one of the ways we collaborate is like giving artists 15 minutes to create digital pieces, which is like very difficult, because these spaces are not used usually for that. They're used for like a more what I called wow effect. And we try to push artists that usually work in this like wow effect type of pieces, or that are based on, I don't know, like digital techniques, and make them work into narrative, into telling a story. So that's it, I think. This was a project by Keiken, which is a collective. They presented this, and then this piece moved to digital gallery online. And well, Theo Trean, that he was coming, no, he took up. Well, another piece from another artist. That's it.
Thank you very much. Okay, I have to change this 1 sec. It's right here. Here.
You have to go back, I think.
Oh, reloaded. I have to go back.
Yes.
Perfect. So what we also have here, sorry, Yannick, we have Yannick Antoine, as I presented him before. He's a project coordinator of IMAL, which for us is one of the key centers in Europe now in terms of how they understand digital art. And he's also been part of very relevant projects such as Connected Cities and many projects that he will introduce. And it's an enormous pleasure having you here.
Thank you. So thank you for inviting me. So IMAL is a non-profit organization located in Brussels, indeed. We focus on the creative and critical use of new technologies. And IMAL was founded in 1999. We had our first event in 2000, at a time when digital art wasn't such an obvious thing at all. And also in relation to this question of spaces, so now we are an established center, but when we started, we didn't have a fixed space. We were nomadic with like some festivals and other projects we talked about here. So we always had to find new spaces for our different events. It was a bit uncomfortable in some way, but also it created some interesting events, interesting meetings of different worlds. This video you see right now, for example, was an exhibition that took place in the restaurant of a large public administration building in Brussels, which was in 2003 the last place where you would expect to find digital art. And the fact that it was in that strange place that the audience, the people, the clerks working there were suddenly confronted with digital art, is I think an interesting experience with all the indeed and comfort of not having your own fixed place. At the time we were mostly doing exhibitions and workshops that were attempting to sensibilize people to the potential of that more or less new form of art. Can switch. And in 2007, we finally had the luck to have our own center. It was at the second floor, still is actually, partly, on the second floor of an old industrial building in the canal area of Brussels. A building that is actually, was actually at the time already shared with different creative artistic organizations focused on sound, architecture, video production, etc. So in 2007 was also a time where this hybridization of the digital and the reality was starting to becoming more and more visible. That was, if I'm not wrong, the launch year of the iPhone. So suddenly these small computers were starting to appear everywhere and not just, in offices. And so it made a lot of sense for us that the opening exhibition of our new center was focused on that, on pieces that were in a way or another merging this still at the time sometimes perceived as an alien abstract reality of the digital with the real world. There is a piece in particular, we can switch, that I want to highlight from the exhibition, which was, this is me, which was connecting actually Second Life with the real life. So it was called The Gate. It was like a big gate. And the idea is that through this gate, people in Second Life could see the people in the exhibition space, and the people, the opposite way, the people in the exhibition space could see the people in Second Life, and they could interact together, which created a lot of interesting. We did plan, for example, an online performance in Second Life with there was a Second Life performance collective that did a performance for us because that was also, I forgot to mention that, but that was also taking place in an art-focused island in Second Life. So we were connecting two art-focused places and not just one random place in Second Life. So there was a planned performance in Second Life, but also the audience started performing in front of this virtual audience on the other side. So that was pretty fun. And so, since we had this place in 2007, we could expand a bit our program. We had new possibilities. For example, the possibility to have artist residencies, to welcome artists, to offer them more material or space to start developing projects. We could also start to develop regular activities like recurring, for example, lectures, recurring formats of workshops, etc. And to start to have an audience that would not especially come from one event, but would come to the center. Oh, IMAL is open, there's something happening, I will go and see. And start building an audience which would be exposed then to things that maybe they wouldn't have gone to see if it was happening somewhere, but they were going because we managed somehow to start building a relationship with this audience. And having this fixed location kind of helped. It kind of helped us to exist somehow in the mind of people. We weren't just like a name that you could see at the bottom of the flyer of some exhibition. It was a place, and this physical space helped us in that. Which I think is all I wanted to see about this. Yes. Next. Did you skip twice?
Oh, maybe I did. Sorry.
Yes.
This one?
Yeah, this one.
Okay, sorry.
In 2012, and going further in this idea of merging the digital and the physical, we opened our own Fab Lab. A lot of artists we worked with, especially in residencies, we noticed that a lot of them started using digital fabrication. So we thought it would be interesting to offer this to artists and to the rest of the community. So we opened our Fab Lab, and likewise, like the rest of the center, it started becoming a place of gathering, and it started growing its own community as well. And we started having mergers of the community from the Fab Lab, the community from our residents, the audience that come and see the exhibition, etc., etc. And then we can move on. So all was going well. Still, there were things that we wanted to improve. For example, so that's what you saw when you arrived at the building from in the past. Since the beginning until a couple of years ago, it wasn't really obvious that there was digital art going on there. So there was an issue with visibility. And the other issue is that IMAL is located in Molenbeek, which is a town that you might have heard about. It's where most of the terrorists from the Paris and Brussels attacks were coming from or passed through. It's a very underprivileged neighborhood in Brussels. And there's something very unfortunate, is that a lot of our audience is coming from everywhere else, but not really from the neighborhood. So we thought it was a pity, and we wanted also to develop more activities towards that neighborhood. And so in 2016 we had the chance to get European funding to develop these two aspects further. So first, to expand the center physically down to the ground floor, which provides us with more visibility and also gives us more space. And also in parallel to that, to develop a program of social inclusion, especially focused on the Fab Lab, because the Fab Lab is a good entry point for this kind of activities, but also trying to bring several dedicated groups from the neighborhood into our exhibitions with a very dedicated and specific kind of mediation about our works. So yes, next. And so it took a lot of time, because we got the money in 2016-17, and I don't know if any of you has gone through renovation works, but it always takes more time than it should. So in March 2020, we finally could open with a big, nice exhibition called Quantum, and also in parallel to that, a program of talks and performances, etc. So we started to explore this potential of the new building, the possibility to organize a lot of things in parallel, because before it was mostly sequential. We would have like conferences and then exhibition and then performance, and now we are starting to explore this possibility. We can do several things in parallel, except that the virus happened and then we had to close, like the week after the opening. Which was, a bit of a pity. And just like you, we didn't really feel like having online activities. We were all overwhelmed by the sheer amount of online exhibitions and online workshops and online everything. And we did consider, we did a couple of things. We put some art project online, and then after a couple of weeks, we were like, that's too much, let's do something else. And at the same time, we were hearing the cries for help from the artists who were struggling, because suddenly no more exhibitions, no more performances, so how do they live? And so we decided, and also because that's the only thing we could do anyway in terms of activities, because everything was closed, we developed much more the residencies program during that period, and as a way to support the artists and to do something also, because we needed to do things. And finally here we are. So since then, fortunately, the lockdowns have been a bit less strict and a bit less current. So here we are, that's the space we have. So as you can see, it's connected to the street. So now we are finally visible. Doesn't mean that when you pass in front of it, you immediately understand, oh, this is a space for digital art or whatever, but at least it's a space. During I think it was during the first week actually, or I think it was after maybe a reopening. I'm losing totally concept of time with all this closing and opening. But I know that at some point there was a group of like a class passing in front of it, and like they entered and it was like, what is it? And we gave them a tour, and that was really nice. That's something that was totally impossible in the past. And you can move through the picture. So we have now an expanded Fab Lab, which allows us to deal more easily with having in parallel residencies and the community from the Fab Lab going to the Fab Lab, also to have more machines, also more diverse machines, not just digital fabrication, but also like regular tools. We have more space for workshops, also artist residency. Now we have a permanent space for residency, so we can have residencies all year long, which is very nice. And we're actually still learning, because it's kind of very recent for us, and we're still discovering the different ways we can play with these different spaces. We discover the constraints, and also because sometimes sound, for example, likes to travel through the whole building. And you realize that, we have a lot of space, we can do a lot of things, but actually you can't, because sound is going through the different spaces. But so it's still a work in progress, actually. We've been there for like 20 years, or let's say 13 in terms of space, and we're kind of still exploring, especially with a field that is constantly evolving as well. We also have to adapt. So that's where we are now. Of course, we keep going exhibitions as well. I forgot to mention it. That's all.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I'm going to come back here. Oops.
Now you have to exit the full screen.
I think if I play this, there we go. And as I was saying before, we also have here today Chris Arguelles. She's somehow representing the Academy today, and we think that's also the Academy in terms of the academic field, not the Oscars Academy or something like that, because it sounded like that, right?
I can also pretend.
You could represent whatever you would like. but
I'm the Joker today.
We really think that this vision, like more the thought vision of everything, is also a way of opening like mental spaces for people to somehow be able to explore what these things mean and how this can be translated to society in a way. So thank you very much for coming. It's a pleasure having you here as always, and you can tell us a bit more about you.
The pleasure is mine. Thank you for the invitation. And I will try to be. So I don't have a presentation like most others did, so it's going to be quite dry as academia demands. So I usually also have, 1 hour to bore my students about this topic, so I will try to keep it short. And I'm a bit of the motivation, and when Diego kind of asked me to join today was I think the title was something like New Spaces or so, no? And then I felt the dress kind of in two ways, no? So in the way, or kind of like this ambiguation of the idea of, okay, space understood as both of your spaces, which provide a certain kind of, if you will, a kind of infrastructure or a kind of space for these things to develop. But and then as an architect, I feel somehow this being addressed, because I mean, I must say I enjoy renovations, and then when you saw your video of pouring beton in this ground floor, I thought I would never see this in a digital arts festival. But here no, but so I felt that I feel addressed in that sense, and maybe perhaps for that, I don't know if I have a clear answer, but in the sense of my own research has a lot to do with, I mean, barely what I try to depict here with this kind of very short, contained slide is. So how I came from architecture into research, and now let's say I'm doing a PhD in philosophy, so it's rather kind of 3 big steps, which took me from first conceptualizing the idea of space, so kind of like dealing with, the different, dimensions, width, height, how big a door must be, and stuff like this, to already what was kind of like an emergent field, let's say, in the years when I started architecture, let's say like 10 years ago, which was this idea of CGI, so computer-generated images for architecture, and also some sort of these skyscrapers with glass, and where everybody looks super happy, it's always shiny, it's always a good day. And kind of I got more into this direction, and I started to let's say try to study more critically what does actually space entail in that sense, no? And most of the topics that I also kind of were brought up by other speakers before had a lot to do with how does actually I think there was this these new materialities, no? I think most of you address it. How does one actually translate between these domains, no? And so one of the things that after coming from this very concreteness, no? So from the pouring of beton into the philosophy, is that actually what philosophers do mostly is just abstract, no? So they don't care so much about whether if something is digital or, I mean, of course you can go into specific designations and the categorical distinctions, but one of the main issues is like, we don't have to talk about whether if it's digital or artificial or natural, but we can just talk about what is really like the idea of space, no? Or for example, there is a lot of metaphysics that go just into developing, okay, what is the idea of a being, of a body, of, what is a sense, a perception, and so on, no? So, and as I said, I would perhaps, to keep it short, one of the seminars I'm leading right now, I'm currently teaching in the Technical University in Vienna, it's addressing precisely this idea of an optics, so kind of understood from the very, let's say, scientific, physical world, how this, light refract, and how, also from a quantum perspective, what does it actually entail, a kind of quantum optics, so how can one address this idea of picking it up, for example, or in the seminar I'm leading right now, picking it up directly from Descartes, no? So this guy who was basically who was very concerned with what is it actually the connection between the vision and the kind of like what we see and we can actually experience, no? So for example, let's say the model of vision that Descartes describes is very much based on an idea of touch, no? And this is kind of striking because we think quite often, for example, no? And this is also one of the things I picked up from working more in an academic, let's say, a bit inwards environment, is that it actually, these things kind of are kind of constantly being picked up, no? So the history of philosophy always picks the same themes, no? So and why it does so, it's because there is always something at stake that destabilizes what is the relation with the body and a space, no? So, and this is constantly, so one of the things with Descartes, which kind of emerged after this, was the Cartesian space, no? And the Cartesian space is the world in where 3D things are kind of depicted with a vanishing point, and this is kind of a given, no? And so this is, for example, my entry point from coming from the CGI world was, okay, so we are actually always talking about 3D space, which is for us a given, but then let's say Descartes set a certain kind of, he modeled a certain kind of space, which is a space that entails that time needs to be always per se in suspension, no? So this suspension of time, which is basically saying, of course you can model that there's a building and then the light and the sun cast a different shadow, no? So of course you can in principle model this, let's say, the passage of time, but as it is in some sort of abstraction, which already in the Renaissance, or I don't know, in kind of the early beginnings when perspective started to be described, was already conceived as perspectiva artificialis, in contrast to the perspectiva naturalis, which was, for example, I don't know, how Greek, let's say, if you go to the Parthenon in Athens, you see that, for example, things are placed in let's say the different elements in the Acropolis are placed in a sense of harmonic distribution, which has not to do with a vanishing point that collides, like, you know, in the Cartesian space all the lines are parallel, for example, or in principle there's a simulation that all the lines meet in some sort of point, but in principle deriving from the Euclidean principles, the lines which are depicted as parallel, they meet in some sort of, I don't know, infinite point where we will never reach, or in this idea in the horizon line, which is also an abstract construct. No, so without going any further into this, what I try to say is that, for example, one of this idea of the suspension of time, and in this sense of, I have to check my notes before I go too much into an oblique angle, but some of the topics that you were picking up already, no? So this idea of the sensible body, no? And this is something which I in one of the seminars which I'm leading right now, for example, we're dealing a lot with text from phenomenology, no? So this is kind of, I mean, let's say it's a bit prior to the digital developments that we are actually experiencing today, but one of their many concerns was how can we actually bring back a certain sense of, I don't know, experience, or a certain sense of percepting body into, or to rediscuss with the connection between the body and the mind, for example, or the body and the spirit, or kind of the sense or definition of a being, which has, who does not take for granted this idea of the Cartesian space. No? And one of the things that Merleau-Ponty, which is one of the, I don't know, kind of figures in this phenomenology French school, he says basically, he brings a lot of attention to what painters do. No? So in painters, he says, for example, painters bring their body with them. And this is kind of like bringing together again a sense of, on the one hand, to inhale a certain kind of breath into this artificiality, no? And he specifically talks a lot, and I think also he quotes quite often, I don't know, like Paul Klee or different artists like from Cézanne and so on. So I can say like, they establish what we now celebrate as great painters of the history of art, as always referring to themselves, not only, so kind of one of the qualities of being in such body of the painter who needs to, you know, who's in an action with painting, is that the idea of the body is never really done which is only seen. It's also one which is consciously of being seen. And therefore, for example, I think it's with Paul Klee, where in a moment he says that when I walked in the forest, I feel as much as observed by the forest as the forest is observing me somehow. Also, as I am observing the forest, and this sort of reciprocity is what is kind of like this inhaling of a breath into what the, and is precisely, for example, what he poses as the idea of inspiration. No? So inspiration necessarily being that which is kind of like the Neumann, so the kind of breathing in and breathing out. No? And this brings a kind of like a corporeality from an abstract domain, which is the domain of the breath, also of the breath of the living creature, which is not necessarily also, then just to bring it to kind of most post-human topics where you also just addressing with the cyborg body, or which is the kind of way in which we relate with things which we consider to be inanimate. No, so but if we do consider that this inanimate thing, so let's say the screen, or I don't know, the way in which, or the way these different media materialities that we are experiencing, how we can actually, I don't know, in a sense, find some sort of breath in them, no? And I think also by the end of the previous discussion, there was this sort of how to bring a certain kind of touch to it, no? I don't know if I already been kind of maybe opening up the conversation would be more productive.
No, I mean,
Than continuing with this.
I mean, you can continue forever.
Blah, blah. Yeah, exactly.
It's so
That's
nice
the problem.
Like we can just watch. No,
Yeah.
but no. Thank you very much for sharing your 3 points of view. For us, as before that, the 3 profiles are very different. We also tried to do it here, and somehow inviting like the perspective of a festival, the perspective of a center, and the perspective of the academia somehow is related to the different perspectives of time, right? Like the festival is something that has a lot to do with being present in a very specific time, in a moment. At the center, it's a little bit more middle term to long term, and then academia, it's like forever. So how is this in terms of digital art, and especially right now, as we were talking before, that it seems that everything's become so accelerated. Like, how do you think digital art or the digital art panorama is reacting to time? Like, it's changing so much, but it's also like we're also carrying like thoughts from very, very many years ago. How do you feel from your different points of view or your institutions that this is happening? Like, how is our relation with time changing with this new thing that's happening in the field? That's a difficult question.
Well, from my point of view, a festival is, of course, an accelerative process, no? Like, you have to push the public into living a lot of things in 3 days. We try to expand it, or we also try to bring projects that can sort of stop time for a bit, but that's like, yeah, the minimum, because you have to sell tickets, and that was like what you were asking, no? Music is the center because of other reasons, but money is one of the main, no? So yeah, being a festival, you need to take that in account, and we know that a lot of the public is not like specified public, and they come to party, no? So you have to have this sort of balance in which, like, you have to make the public sort of stay and make them, in a way, think or go out of the box, or at least move in ways that you're not used to see in a music festival. That's what we try to do. But then in reality, well, yeah, most of the people want to get drunk and dance, no? So it's a difficult balance, and I do think that festivals, especially music and digital arts festivals, have this problem because the public is not used to pay attention or listen even, no? Like, they pay for concerts and then they're talking through all the concert. And well, it's an issue, and it's part of the acceleration, I think, of the world, that we don't have patience anymore. And I think that one of the questions is like, how do you make the public have patience again, or at least make them feel uncomfortable, no? Make them question something when they see or experience a piece or listen to a concert. Like, for example, in concerts we have a very big ambient program in like the first part of the festival, and a lot of people, it's like, oh, this is boring, no? Like, I didn't pay for this. We have like received all types of comments, and it's like, well, it's not my problem. Like, you didn't know to what you're paying for. But yeah, people expect this acceleration and this like festive side that has nothing to do with patience or with paying attention or with actually experiencing something like in presence, no?
Yeah, absolutely. And in your particular case, you also have like a very loyal public. So in a way, I think you're managing to translate it to at least some people that like every year want to go there to discover artists, music, visual things. So yeah, I think maybe our job is more difficult because it's only once a year. So we have to keep them like looking at us throughout the year,
yes,
even though we're not doing anything. But in terms, for example, of a center, I think this is also really interesting. And you also mentioned this relation with the neighborhood as well.
Yeah.
You've also been working for over 10 years or more, and in different locations. How is the impact of the public, not only the neighborhood public, but also like the city public and the international public with the festival? Is it something you work on, or how has it changed throughout the years?
I mean, except the local audience where we indeed had a specific program targeted to that, I don't really. I mean, we do face the same challenges. It's not because we are here all year long that we don't have also this pressure of people coming and we have to keep them interested, etc., etc. It's maybe a bit different during the exhibitions because I think that the experience of an exhibition is maybe less. It doesn't have the same expectations. So in terms of patience and attention, I think we are a bit more lucky and it's a bit easier in our sense. But still, I wouldn't say that there's a huge. We do experience a huge difference in that. Maybe a small anecdote, I don't know how to call it, that I could share, is that last year we had an exhibition by Kurt Schlager, an artist who was part of Granular Synthesis, for those who know it. And it's an installation, it's like a 30 minutes, I think, video loop that happens in a pitch black space. So because it's totally dark and it's actually playing on retinal retention, so basically it's black most of the time and sometimes you have flashes of images and then it disappears. So you really need total darkness. Because you need total darkness, we had to ask people to leave their phones at the entrance. And then that was the main reason, but then talking with the artist, we also justified it a bit and said, okay, that's also an opportunity for you to just like disconnect for half an hour and just immerse yourself in this darkness. And we noticed, I think we had kind of two different reactions. On one hand, we had people who were like, that's great. Finally I can disconnect for half an hour, and they were losing themselves in that space for a long time, sometimes more than the time that was needed. And there were people who were like very uncomfortable. I mean, uncomfortable with the darkness, but also uncomfortable with being enclosed and uncomfortable with not being able to use their phone and to take pictures, etc., etc. So, yeah, I think the impact of this change is that maybe you have two reactions. There's one reaction where people are kind of attached to it, and one reaction where people are looking for ways to get detached from it. And indeed, some kind of formats can enable that people to experience a slower time, but it's a challenge, clearly.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of this idea of the slow time, I think what academia, or at least how everybody or most of the people perceive academia, it's something like very, very slow, and also something that really needs a very, very long time, and and that it takes a lot of time also for like contemporary artists to get into the academia lines of thoughts. How is or in your experience, or in ATTP, or well, yeah, however you feel about it, but how do you think like the contemporary practices, like the really contemporary, the things that are happening at the moment, can have an impact in that as well, or you think it's not? How is that relation of the doing and then the thinking and theorizing about it?
Well, I'm gonna speak very specifically for the case of the institute where I work. So I think there's definitely like academia also follows fashions, no? So then it's also highly more specialized into, let's say, I don't know, welcoming and embracing topics which are of, so it specifically, there is, I don't know, specifically in the center where I work, in the institute where I work, there's a kind of emphasis, so we are kind of like picking up some sort of like topics which have, I don't know, roots as deep as like, I don't know, like Neoplatonism and so on, these things which go back, of course, like millennia, no? And these things, yeah, of course, have different rhythms, and specifically where I'm placed is kind of specifically a slow motion, or not slow motion, but it's, as I said, it's kind of concerned with things that perhaps are timeless. I don't know if that's a kind of like too much of a bigger goal, but definitely what at least my experience of academia is that it doesn't cater to a public which is kind of, immersed in the kind of economic exchange. And also, in principle, this is one of the things which makes academia a bit of, I mean, it seems like I'm making like a kind of institutional critique, but I mean, it's one of the things that makes academia sometimes a bit like secluded, no? So it's kind of like we are there thinking about, I don't know, the future, and and so it's a bit of that's kind of also for me, I mean, as a kind of practicing architect, going into more towards academia is one of the things which I feel the most, let's say, frustrating, no? So there is a lot of not much happening, but it's also not. So there's a bit of So, for example, for me, in my teaching practice, so I lead this one seminar which is very, let's say, theoretical, but there is one other kind of practices which are much more, let's say, exercise-based. And also because my institute is located inside an architecture faculty, which kind of brings us already. I mean, I don't want also to go too much into detail, but the idea is that the way we approach the idea of architecture is through this kind of, I don't know, Bacon concept that we coined as architectonics, which has to do with something which is much more related to a practice of the body in space. So kind of like we avoid this idea of architecture being that of like, you know, a certain historicity, or architecture being that of composition or so, which is usually the practice attached to the idea of architecture theory. And so architecture theory being possibly understood as a kind of, practice, more like philosophical practice, but simultaneously always in those exercise courses using the tools that architecture students have. So the architecture students are not studying philosophy per se, or might not have those interests or those backgrounds. So one of the tools that architecture students have, it's always drawing, no, or always 3D modeling, or all of these things, no. So, for example, in one of these other courses where I kind of try to integrate this theoretical approach into a kind of a practice of theory, so a practice of theory in the sense of how do we actually translate this into something which is rendering a kind of an idea, and for that sense, perhaps is where we come also a bit more closer to kind of the visuality, or the kind of, let's say, substance of the idea of the digital art. Although per se we might not call it digital art, we just call it kind of like a rendering of the kind of theory that we're trying to I don't know, expose. But in that sense, the idea of time. So in this exercise, for example, that I'm referring to, we always talk about the idea of time as being cyclical, and this is again one of the main kind of, if a definition of what academia attempts is to not see, let's say, time, or I mean, I'm talking about academia, and I hope nobody in the room is an academic, and then it's like, no, it's not true. But at least in the institute where I work, kind of like our approach is that this sort of like idea of a progress, and that it's a past, and then it's a present, and therefore, if we are trying to address topics which were pertaining of a time which mobile phones didn't exist, they are not valid anymore. This is kind of like something we try to get away from, because it's true that if you try to understand the kind of cyclicity of the concerns and the problems that, I don't know, for example, Descartes was facing with the idea of, okay, he's describing, I mean, I didn't go much into detail before, but when he's describing his model of vision is a model of vision which has to do with touch. What he's saying basically is that it's not possible to access an idea of ubiquity of vision, which means like, we need to be present in the place, and we need to be able to have some sort of like, we can only see the things that we can in principle reach. And so this conceptually is not so different from saying, how do I sit in my room and my computer and I'm looking at, I don't know, Google Maps from, I don't know, a place I've never been. So how does one actually, I don't know, what sort of connections of time and space does this kind of, conditions of possibility open, And the cyclicity of time, for example, is, I would say, kind of fundamental in understanding this idea, what I described very briefly as the architectonic model. So kind of the idea of the body in space.
Yeah, I think there's something, I mean, of course it's really, really abstract, but as I've seen some works from your students, they have applied for several of our open calls a couple years ago, or last year. This kind of very abstract thought somehow has a real impact in what the younger generations are somehow starting to produce. So in a way, this is very well connected to what the practitioners are actually doing, because they're leaving their academic backgrounds to start creating. So I think that's the way that you somehow solve this like time problem with society and academia, the outputs of the students. And in that sense, I wanted to also ask you if you've perceived like a change in how people work in terms of digital art in the recent years, because we've only been here, like our festival has only been here for like 3 years, and we're starting to perceive changes in that very, very short span of time. But I'm sure in Mira that you've been going for a very long time already. Like how how has this, or how have the interests changed throughout the years, or what are we looking at now that we weren't looking at before, or what was interesting before that it's not anymore? How do you feel about this?
Well, I think like one of the main things that I'm seeing, and I'm glad that it's finally happening, is like the change from like the tool that when I started curating Mira, most of the things, or most of the installations and probably like the visual approaches of visuals with music were based on the technology that we're using, like I don't know, processing or generative visuals, or I don't know, generating data from whatever. And I think now there's this as well, but there's also an emphasis in narrative and experience, in like being able to connect through stories much more than it was before. And also I think that there's much more multidisciplinary in like creating artwork. Like there's a lot of artists that are plastic and are starting to include, I don't know, light, or like the sense of space, or I don't know, mixing painting with generative tools. And I think, for me, that's like the most interesting thing that's happening right now. It has been happening, but I don't think that it was sort of mainstream or popular, or people were not used to see this in festivals, in like festive festivals. You know, it's like it was much more an area of thought, or in spaces that are much more academic than what is Mira, no? And right now we're finding this merge in more mainstream works or more mainstream artists.
Yeah, I think this is really interesting because it somehow goes against this idea of the instant, of the very quick time, right? Because for a narrative thing, you need to spend time to understand the narrative. So I think it's also a mechanism to fight this idea of having to do things that are really, really fast. So just GIFs, for example, which is something that had a huge impact some years ago, but now GIFs are not that on the top of the thing right now. So I think it's somehow a mechanism to fight this, probably. And in terms of the center, for example, specifically the Fab Lab, which is a concept of a place that has also been expanded more and more in the recent years. I think or my perception at least, until a couple years ago, like all the Fab Labs, somehow they looked pretty much the same. Like it didn't matter where you were, but the people were somehow fabricating the same kind of things. So it also generated like a very, very expanded community. But I think now it's like the Fab Labs are really starting to get their potential, like right now, because we've also managed to go beyond the tool and somehow start questioning it and thinking more. How's your perspective in this?
Well, the Fab Lab, it kind of connects to what you were saying in terms, among other things, of going more multidisciplinary. So you have artists who are not just like doing works for screens, but for example start from a 3D model, they create a video for it, and then they also make a 3D model and they exhibit everything together. So there is something in artists exploring indeed different ways. We've had exhibitions, digital art exhibitions, or at least exhibitions that I would call digital art, where there were no computers anymore. 10 years ago it would have been maybe unthinkable. Is it digital art? There's no computer. So this Fab Lab, this artistic use of the Fab Lab is part of that, I think, move of going more among different disciplines, which are not just, of course, culture. It also can be dance, it can be whatever. What was the question again?
No, I think you already answered.
Okay.
Like this change of going beyond the tools. I think this is something.
Yeah, but you were talking about the community as well, I think.
Oh yeah. No, I was. Well, whatever. No. I meant because the Fab Lab as a space is really particular in terms of production. Like it's a very particular place to be able to produce digitally physical things. So it's like the perfect mix of the digital towards the physical and the other way around. So for me, it's like a very iconic place in terms of the spaces for digital arts. And I think this also the shared community of people creating together somehow generates like a universal thought, like a universal way of thinking that somehow helps the whole community in a way. So
yeah, it's not so. I mean, we see that practically it's not so universal because there's a lot of Fab Lab in Brussels, and we see that every Fab Lab has its own approach, its own community. It's strangely not just the tools. It's also the managers of the Fab Lab. It's the kind of project. It's how open or not open it is, and yeah, we kind of placed ourselves as the creative Fab Lab in some way, but still we have a very diverse community, and indeed it becomes a meeting point of our artists in residencies, and we have like different program. There's a very specific Fab Lab residencies program for people who really want to use the Fab Lab for a project, but then the people who are there for normal, let's say, residency, also sometimes they're like, you have a laser cutter, so maybe I could use it to do that, could you explain it to me, etc. So these people are meeting. We have students who are coming. We have a special program for students from art school to come for a week and learn how to use these. So they meet also with these people, and there's the regular community of the Fab Lab, in which you find artists, but you have also designers, you also have just people who are into DIY, you have people from universities as well, who just want to explore things. So, and these people all meet together into this space. So it's very interesting that there are these tools that are fixed somewhere in a physical location, and then the people come gather around these, and they meet, and some things happen sometimes.
absolutely. Well, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts. I'm going to open again to questions. So if there's anyone in the audience that has any question, it can be in Spanish, puede ser en español y la traducimos. Or any comment about anything? Any questions around? Over there.
This question is for Anna, right? You briefly mentioned something about storytelling through visuals and concerts or in more like club setting. And I was wondering if you could talk more about that or give some examples, because I do visuals, but I do also 3D art. And I'm finding it really difficult to find that combination of like, how can I keep the people like in that party setting, but have a little bit of like concept or thought in the experience without taking them from that, like taking them away from that.
Well, in concerts and visuals, I think one of the tools that is working very well with that is CGI, because it's a build-up world with a narrative in itself transformed into a performance, no? One of the examples, an artist that is really famous here, Cabe Canems, I don't know if you know him, they have this collective called Mitrilo, and they usually work on narrative pieces that then are probably transformed into more abstract forms, but are based on this narrative creation. Then there's other ways, like for example with GAN and artificial intelligence, that in itself it has a concept, but of course if you don't understand how that works or you don't have a special interest, then it's difficult. And what I mean, and it was one of the questions that Diego asked, is that there's a lot of effort from the artist right now of either mixing things or paying attention to this type of storytelling, or at least like guiding the public into an experience. But I do think that at least in festivals as Mira, there is a lot of public that is very like faithful to the festival, but there is a lot of other public that is not. And it's hard sometimes to connect or understand deeply what's the goal of the artist, no? This always happens with art, but I think in a festival it's much more immediate, And if you connect, you pay attention, and if you don't, then you turn around. But the public has to make the effort to connect, no? And in Spain, that's difficult. O sea, like I've been, I don't know, to Germany or even Brussels, no? And the public is much more patient in this type of experiences, no? While in my experience in Mira, there's a lot of people that are, but there's a lot of others that can't connect or don't understand. And well, my recommendation is like, get deep in your concepts, no? Like you'll find your own way of telling a story, and there might be people that don't understand it, but I'm sure that there will be people that are actually interested in either the tools you're using or the processes that you're creating, or maybe the stories that you end up building. But I don't think like there's a hack, no? It's an interchange between the public and the artist.
Yeah, I could give you, there's another example, actually a Spanish artist, Felix Luque Sanchez, works in Brussels, and we had him in residency and exhibition, etc. And his installations are very narrative as well, and the way he does it is mostly by having several pieces. So he's using the whole exhibition space and for one project basically, and the exhibition space, in the exhibition space you will find a video, prints, a sculpture, a robotic sculpture, another video, and it's through this combination of different things that you start to combine the different elements, and it creates a narrative. It's not a narrative in the sense that there is a story with this point and this point and this point and you understand it clearly, but with seeing these different elements sequentially, because you visit them in a way and all together when you have had the whole experience, it does tell a story in some way, and I think it's a good way also to do it, to have several elements that you can use to attach to it.
Thank you very much. Is there any other question? Oh, over there.
Hi. Thank you very much to the organizers, especially Diego and all of you. And well, I am Carolina Fernandez Castrillo. I am curator and professor of media arts. And from what you have said, it was to me very inspiring what you were mentioning, Anna, in terms of literacy, like maybe the public is different from one place to another. And in terms of attention, I find that it's quite interesting. And I would like to ask you something in general from the three fields, somehow, well, the three states that Diego mentioned. I am maybe more on the academic side, also curatorship. And well, first of all, regarding what you said, I feel that maybe we have another perspective about academics. For example, to me, it's essential to believe that my students are the digital avant-garde, and I try to treat them with the highest respect, and I find that what we do in class is sometimes even better from what we have outside. So I really believe this. Maybe I am in a not very realistic world, but it is how I work at university. I know that probably is an exception, but I really believe that it's the way in which we have to behave if we have this profile. And my question is quite general. I am leading now a project from Venice that is called Digital Media Culture, Intercreativity and Public Engagement. And I would like to understand which is your point of view regarding this idea of the participatory culture, the idea of intercreativity. You were mentioning the role of the audience, the public. So I would like to know in which is the present and which are the future projects that maybe you are planning to develop in that sense, how to engage with the audience, maybe not treating them like public, but like producers, like part of the process, not to interact with the final production, the festival, the events in the institution or the classes, but how to make them join the process itself. So in creative terms, I am curious about knowing which is your point of view on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolina.
Well, I see this as two like different areas of work. One that I think is very important, especially coming from a festival, is developing deep relationships with artists and try to work with them through time. That this is something that is sort of negative in a music festival, because you have to have new content every time, no? And well, especially in music, no? If an artist has an album, then it's part of the festival because this was the album. And in some ways, like, this part of the festival is curated with another guy, so I try that the other projects, like for example the workshops or the conferences or the installations or the side projects that we do, always come back with the artist, no? Because I think that it's also nice to like push them forward in terms of support, but there's much more interesting results when there's a relationship with someone, no? Instead of like, I book you, you come, you play, I'll never see you again. And I think that that type of engagement is probably something that in a longer term makes the public more interested, no? Because the results are based on the slow time of production. This is like one of the things that we try to do. It's not always possible, but it's something that I always have in mind. And in other ways, I think that, yeah, trying to make the public uncomfortable, at least in a small part of the festival. We tried to do this, I don't know, we brought a project, for example, of Audint, that is like a collective, sound collective. They were born from like the Crew team, I don't know if you know them, but it's like Mark Fisher and Code 9 and whatever. And they work with very weird installations for what like you're used to see in a festival like Mira. We brought them in 2019 and it was like a sound installation with basses that go in infrasound, so you don't hear anything, it's just vibration. And then there were people around performing, like giving drugs to the public, of course fake drugs, but the people didn't know that they was fake drugs, and so a guy just appeared and came, and it's like, here is like a pastilla, like a pill, no? And like seeing that the people don't understand anything, and the people that do understand is because they have to sit down and like maybe look around and like get certain like scared. So I think that pushing this at least small spaces into making people, oh, I didn't understand anything, or like to understand I have to make an effort. I think that's like a way of trying to change this impatience of what we have right now of like content, no? I don't know if I responded to your question, but
so maybe to pick it up also from when you left it, in also in regard to your question with the students, for example. So for me, I think you mentioned also briefly this idea of literacy, no? So for me, what I sense also, and I think, I don't know if you misunderstood, but I treat my students with absolute respect, because I also do think that they do things that, so they kind of, the literacy for which they are coming to approach these topics are kind of like, I don't know, for me, I mean, I also grew up already, let's say, in a digital native, or however one wants to call it, but in that sense that they do have a kind of understanding of, maybe I don't know how to express it, but it is in a kind of sense what you were referring now, and I think it also picks up with the idea what you were talking before about the Fab Labs. No? So how does this thing become shareable, or how this kind of like literacy can be communicated? I think not only towards the people who are the producers, but also through the audience. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know if it's at least in my pedagogy, or in my kind of like project as a lecturer, it's always to I don't know, somehow it also, for me, it's combined with this idea of going away from the idea of technology being something rather than going for you mentioned a few times like tools and instruments, for example. No, so in the development of a certain instrument, so instrument in the sense of something which is not necessarily operative, so it kind of operates on a technical level, so on a technique rather than on a technology, you can kind of start to unfold this idea of a literacy, which, for example, in the approach at the institute where I work, is much close to the idea of a coding literacy. No, so at the end, at a certain point, we will all be somehow, in a way, literate in coding, or I don't know, coding in the sense that we will go and write in our computers, but we will understand the kind of sort of fabric of how these things work. And in that sense, I think it would be, and I think you also in the previous panel, you kind of express this in the idea of it needs to be things like NFT, and it needs to be kind of not expressed as some sort of, I don't know, anathema, no? So in the sense of something that we just have to give it as a given, but it is for us, although I kind of, especially with my students, what I try to do is like, there's nothing so much inaccessible in this what we are dealing with, no? It's just another same old question, no? And it's just a different instrument that we have to deal with it, no? And in that sense, being digital fabrication or being, I don't know, installation, which, I don't know, people need to interact with this, but there needs to be a certain kind of, understanding, no, of what is being done as much as what is being received, no? So.
Absolutely. Yeah, also regarding to your question about how we try to involve the public into the process of creating, not only seeing, this is something that's also very interesting for us. We always try to have a lot of workshops within the festival, and in particular this year we have one workshop with one of Madrid's best art schools, which is called TAI, and we've commissioned an artist, a collective of artists, to design a workshop in which, through like maybe 20 hours of work together with the students, are going to think about, ideate, produce, and build an installation that's going to be presented within the festival. So in that particular project, like the public, which are those students, also become the creators somehow. And I think this is something very easy to do in an academic context, because that's the mindset of the people that are already there. But with the general public, it's much more difficult to manage because of the patience thing, because people don't have time. I mean, people do have time, but they don't want to spend it here. They want to spend it, I don't know, enjoying the sun in Madrid. And I think this is really, this is a challenge for us as well. Somehow being able to engage the public so much that they want to spend more time, as you guys are doing today. Like, I'm already exhausted. I can't imagine you. But yeah, like, I think these kind of things also somehow help us reach further the audience, not a further audience, but a deeper audience somehow. So yeah, I think this is something that we put a lot of effort in. I don't know if we managed to do it. I think we do sometimes, but yeah, it's definitely an area to work more on.
It's a challenge.
Yeah.
Medialab Prado also had these work groups, which were like much longer term things, because they basically had these work groups which were focused on a theme. The only example that comes to mind was something dedicated to graphic design with open source tools, and it was just a gathering of people who were like interacting together, discussing together about these topics, and sometimes events would come out of it. It wasn't like mandatory.
Yeah,
it was part of a process, and it was very much more long term. It was not just one workshop that happens, because even a workshop is very like temporary and focused. It was more like, okay, we meet once a week, or I don't know, once a month, whatever, and we develop something together in this, again, slower time. And I think it's a good way to also involve the audience.
Yeah. Absolutely. Oh, another question.
I would like to ask you if you think that the digital art is in terms of protection of the intellectual property, if you think that the digital art will be finally some kind of art that can continue in terms of festivals, theaters, museums, or you think that in the way that maybe you can't protect the intellectual property of all the contents in digital art. It can be just like an space in which creators just research new ways that finally will constitute a product, items in terms of business and production, and these digital artists will just take the digital art like an intermediate process just to create in a future, for instance, video games, production, CGI, support for the movies. That's I wanted to ask you if that's the impression that I have. I work in the production, in the movie business as financial, and I always think I like the digital art, but I have always the impression that it's like a laboratory of artists that only will have the way of living, working in other stages, and it was my question.
Yeah, well, I share your concern about this topic because it's something that's so common in the art world that artists can't really live on their art. They have to find other jobs, and I think in particular in digital art this is something extremely common. Most of our artists, I would like 99% of our artists almost, they also work in other projects, like commercial projects for brands, or they do renderings for an architect company, and they somehow, I mean, I think it's two separate things, and for them it's also two separate things, like the work that they do for like other people because they have the technical knowledge to be able to produce it, because this is also like the people who are behind these kind of works, they also have like an extremely advanced technical capacity, so that sometimes they can just put it to another use for some time. But then, yeah, I think these two worlds, which of course coexist, the commercial work in term, not commercial, but like the work you do for other people and the work you do as art, I think sometimes needs to be separated a little bit more. And this is something that's very difficult to do because it's really very difficult to live from art, but not specifically digital art, any kind of art. So it's a way of living. I mean, I think it's if there's something we have the artists, it's like a survival kit, and trying to use our tools and our abilities to make money out of them. And we know art is very difficult. It's a very difficult field to do that. So yeah, we know why, like the easiest way is to put it into another. The same way as teaching and just other mediums that are somehow make us capable of supporting ourselves and continue creating art while also having money to pay our rents. But yeah, I share your concern. I think maybe sometimes they're too close together.
Yeah, I was gonna say that I think that specifically with digital art, now this separation from commercial work and artistic work is merging much more. And sometimes it's good because, I don't know, a lot of companies or projects are giving digital artists more freedom to present like creative works that have like an essence of the artist, but this also is the thing that makes artists not artists and creators. That is something that is happening a lot right now, especially with like digital technologies, no? That there's this separation is harder and harder to separate. No, it's always together right now, depending on what type of digital art you work with, of course. But with CGI and what you were talking, no, like VFX and these like digital tools, even architecture, now it's all like mixed together, and sometimes it's hard to know what is like an artistic project and what is something commercial. Also, like this is difficult, and I think that it's not good for the artists because they have to keep on creating, no, and keep on using their artistic approach and tools to present something to brands. which can be good, but it's not, because you end up like producing and not having actual time to develop ideas or to develop projects, like big projects. You have to keep on creating, and then most artists, well, not most artists, but a lot of artists spend most of their time being image creators instead of like developing deep projects, no?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry, go.
This connection can also be even more difficult or challenging when you have artists who are like criticizing in some way the technology, and when suddenly, for example, Google is asking them to produce work or to collaborate on something, then you become, it turns into something very, very difficult. Also, not just the time that it takes, but also not really a conflict of interest, but like, what is your ethical stance? And it kind of challenges your ethical stance once we have this situation happening.
Yeah. No, I was just gonna comment that I say it's problematic because I think the art world is very conservative in that sense. So as soon as an artist starts working for a brand, the art world immediately stops considering that person as an artist. And this is something that it's not a problem of the artist, it's a problem of the art world, that it's so conservative in that sense. There's this feeling that artists have to be poor somehow. They have to like fight for their lives, and if they suddenly find a brand that's willing to pay them money for them to pay, they're like selling themselves. And I think this kind of discourse is really, really problematic in the art world in general. And we also fight a lot in the other directions. That's why we also commission artists such as Felina this year to create the image of the festival. A festival in which she's created the image completely free, but also she's participating as an artist. So we are also using that tool to somehow give that space, money, and time for artists to be able to develop their work. But I think it's a delicate topic. I don't know if there's any other question around. If not, if not, then I think it's good for today. I'm gonna thank again all of you guys, the three of you and the four of you before, for sharing so easily and so honestly your thoughts on your projects and your topics and your lives with us this day. And I also want to thank everybody who stayed until this time. We know it's late. It's been a very, very intense day, but I think some of the topics that came up today are really fundamental to digital arts and really fundamental to the festival as well, and they also help us continue developing our festival in a deeper way, and somehow continue evolving it for the editions to come to be more complex. And of course, I want to thank you again, Espacio Fundación Telefónica and all their amazing team. It's an honor being here every year. We hope this relationship continues forever, because it's always so easy, so nice, and so comfortable to be here in this house. Also a place of reference for digital artists, one of the few here in Madrid. So yeah, we're very happy to be here. And also thank you to Acción Cultural Española for giving us the opportunity for bringing people to Madrid, which finally after the pandemic we've been able to travel and gather and sharing this space and time with everyone, and hopefully establishing connections that are going to be long on time. So thank you everyone, and see you in the rest of the festival.
Gracias.